Hello, everyone. You are listening to the Minding Mind podcast, where we live life with ease, connection, and permission to just be. I'm your host, Evelyn LeVasseur, and welcome back to another episode. Today, I am sitting down with a special guest, Cera Byer, and we're going to talk all about boundaries, and I cannot wait for you to hear more. But before we get started, let me tell you a little bit about Cera. Cera is a certified life coach and business coach, dancer, embodiment coach, and movement coach. She's the CEO of Intuitive Edge Coaching and Intuitive Edge Creative, based in Los Angeles, California. Los Angeles is on my bucket list. Cera is dedicated to helping artists, creatives, and spiritual practitioners move anything that keeps them in their own way. She's committed to helping people get their brilliant, life-changing work out of their heads and into the world, where it can benefit the collective. Cera firmly believes that creative, talented people don't need a backup plan or a day job, despite what they've been told. We can create security and stability for ourselves, and that shifting wealth into the hands of the healers, helpers, and artists is the best chance we have to reshape society and heal the world. You can find more information about her and her work at intuitiveedge.com. Cera, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. And yes, come to LA, come visit.
Bucket list. So why don't you tell us a little bit, maybe like, how did you get into this work? And maybe what do you want us to know about you before we get started?
Yeah, so Evelyn and I were chatting a little bit before the show. We have a lot in common. We were both lifelong dieters. And as you read in my bio, I'm a dancer. I've been dancing since I was a kid. And that is a rough life if you are not a small person by nature, which I'm not. I've always been a larger bodied person, a curvier person. I still have dreams of being told to tuck my butt as a kid. And I was like, it is, girl. That's just what it is. And I went to a dance school where we got weighed. I was put on diets when I was really, really young. I was put on my first diet, I think, when I was 6. So I had a lifelong dieting history. And in my mid 20s, I was sick, for a long time. I had pretty much full blown eating disorder from 11 until probably 20, mid 20, between 23 and 25, really. But I think at 23 was when I first started really trying to address it. And I had been in talk therapy and I read all these books and I tried all these different things, and coaching really helped me. Life coaches really helped me. And as I started, in my mid 20s, starting to try to figure out what I wanted to do, I worked with coaches, and I always read a lot out of coaching. As somebody who had been in a ton of talk therapy kind of helps you look back at what happened in the past and figure out how you got there. But it doesn't always help you figure out, why am I doing the things I'm doing right now? And how do I get from where I'm at right now to where I want to get to? And that's where coaching comes in and holds that space. And that was what I was really interested in. And I felt as a teacher, as a dance teacher, that was something I was always doing. I taught at a college, and all my boy students always called me coach, which I thought was really funny and fun. I thought it was really cute. And, I would have students come tell me oh, even when I'm studying for tests, I hear you in my head, telling me to keep going and stuff like that. I think that was something that was always part of all the work that I was doing. And so then it made sense to get certified in coaching and start to explore it.
Yeah.
And I also think I've just always been fascinated by human development, by growth, by change, by how we are able to grow so much, right? I know I'm so different even than I was just a couple years ago, but I'm so different than the version of myself that I was when I was so wrapped up in dieting. Our potential for change, the way that our brains are so plastic, is so hopeful to me in a world that is sometimes feels a little bleak.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, oh, wow. You touched on so many different things. It's incredible to me that you were able to almost bypass a lifelong lesson of focusing on your exterior and being able to recognize that there was so much in you that was being kind of shoved away because your focus was that outside. I mean, first, I just want to acknowledge to 6-year-old you, to ever have to feel like who you are and what you look like is any sense of your being, right? I try to explain to my daughters, who of course I think they're the most beautiful things in the world, that our body is literally like the least relevant thing about us, right? Like you're who you are, who you show up as, how you treat other people, how other people feel when you're around, how comfortable you are just sitting there being yourself. Like that's what's important. So I think it's beautiful that you're able to acknowledge that, work through it, and then use what you went through to become the person that you needed, essentially. I love that. What do you think it was in your 20s that made you recognize like that it was even disordered eating that you needed to, if it was what you've done all along, how did you recognize that it was a problem?
Oh, I knew it was. I knew I had an eating disorder for a long time. Like I was very deep in anorexia for a long time. And, I don't know how old you are or how old our audience is, but I was born in the 80s.
Mhm.
And so growing up in the 90s, when like the heroin chic, low-rise jeans, everyone is super, super skinny, super white, super tall, super thin, big boobs, no butt, like that was the look.
Skeletal almost.
Skeletal, very scary. And also that like there were all these like after school specials and magazines and things that would come out that would talk about eating disorders. And for a lot of the people who engaged in disordered eating, we learned our eating disorder behaviors from these magazines. And like, so I knew, and then, I was a dancer. So I'm around other girls who are all, I was taking fen and stuff, like all those drugs that like I had heart problems in my teens, like all these things that were really brutal. And I mean, we're kind of going there. I don't know if this show is going to end up needing a trigger warning, but I think a turning point for me was I'm pretty sure I was 23. And I had a day that was like a normal day for me where I got up and ate like half an apple and drank a bunch of black coffee and worked out for 6 hours because I would go to the gym and then go to dance class. And then came home and like was totally agonizing about what I would eat or not eat for the rest of the day. And I was home alone and I was taking a shower and I passed out and I hit my head and I woke up on the floor of the shower with the water running cold and my head bleeding. And the first thought I had was, this would be a really stupid way to die. It was just this moment where I was like, of all of the things, right? Like imagining like my partner at the time coming home and finding me passed out on the floor of the shower, imagining EMTs having to come get me out of the floor of the shower, thinking about all the things that are going on in the world and all of the beauty that there is in the world. And to be like, I'm going to die alone in the shower over calories. Like, do I
Mhm.
want my tombstone to say she was skinny? Is
Right.
this what I want to be? And the answer was no. And I felt like I really started climbing from the shower floor, right? Like that's where it started, was like, how do I not be this when this is all I have ever known how to be?
Yeah. How did you get yourself to be able to verbalize from that reality, which is powerful, that realization is powerful and painful and beautiful because it sent you on a different trajectory, right? But how did you get yourself from that bathroom floor to being able to verbalize, I need help?
The very first thing I did was outed myself. Literally that day, these are live journal days. I had a live journal. That day, I wrote a post to all of my friends. And I was like, I'm not well. If you come to my house for dinner, I will cook for you and sit down and not eat. Right. Like, here are all of the things that are going on with me. And I'm able to do this because I think everybody knows, but we don't talk about it. I don't know if anyone feels comfortable addressing it with me, or maybe you haven't noticed, but like, this is what's going on and I'm outing myself so that I can't keep this a secret anymore.
Received.
It was received pretty well. I had some close friends who immediately, called and they were like, we're really proud of you for saying this out loud. Like, how can we help? I think there were also some people who were like overwhelmed by it and didn't know how to reach out. And then I think there were other people who recognized themselves in it and they were like, yeah, I think I have some of these behaviors you're describing. I do this too.
Mm.
And I am grateful because I've always been a writer and I've always had that as a medium. Like I've always kept a diary and stuff like that. And so even just having live journal, that early form of social media as a place to like out myself to the people closest to me, that just felt like my gut instinct of like, this works because it's a secret.
Mm.
And so it can't be a secret.
Did you feel like a shift in that power dynamic like from the eating disorder having all the power to you kind of taking some power just in being able to speak it out loud?
I think I just felt terrified for a long time. I was just scared. I knew it felt like the right thing to do, but I felt scared. I just did it anyway. Yeah. And then I think also my next move, and this, in retrospect is funny, but it ended up being helpful, is though I was struggling with restricting, I went out and got all of these books about compulsive overeating because my feeling was that if I allowed myself to start eating normally, I would just never be able to stop.
Yeah. Yeah.
And luckily, like a lot of the healing around compulsive overeating and the healing around restricting is very similar healing. It's just healing around really it gets back into like self-trust.
Mhm.
And then also a lot of the healing was about like knowing how to gauge your hunger and satiety signals, which I had no idea how to do because I had been on a diet my whole life. So
Yeah.
like I eat what the diet tells me to eat when it tells me to eat it. I've either never been hungry or I'm always hungry. I don't know. I can't tell. Like, I don't know what I'm supposed to eat. I would just stand in front of the fridge and cry
Yeah.
for a long time because I'd be like, I don't know what I'm supposed to eat. And so having tools from these books of like, here's what physical hunger feels like on a scale of 0 to 5. And like, if you're dizzy, you waited too long. And if you feel like you have to lay on the floor, you ate too much. And like, somewhere right in between is where you want like physical hunger feels like your stomach starts growling. Like I had been turning that off
Yeah.
for so long that even just like needing practical tools to measure how do I know if I'm hungry? How do I figure out what I want to eat? How
Mhm.
do I figure out like can I eat enough to
Mhm.
feel satisfied and then hang out there, right? Like I needed guidance on like how to do this what should be an instinctual thing of like how to feed myself. And I felt like a baby in some ways.
Yeah. I say that all the time, like that chronic dieting that so many of us did served literally one purpose, and it was to disconnect us from ourselves. Like you lose every ounce of self-trust because you put everything, every part of your well-being is determined by what somebody else tells you is right for you. So you're just disconnected. And it's funny that you bring up so much of this is what I work with my clients on, that like being able to recognize, am I even hungry? What does that feel like? What does comfort feel like? Like and then for people who have been chronic dieters, they know starving or stuffed, they don't know in between. They can't recognize that. So that work is just so important, but also so freeing once you get to that point where you're like, this is how people just eat.
Yeah. And I think that there's something also that's so valuable about starting to heal our relationship with pleasure. A lot of us, I call it like a pleasure deficit, right? And then you need to like diversify your pleasure portfolio. So, like, your pleasure deficit is, you know, I don't allow myself to do the things I like, say the things I like. This is where it starts to get into boundaries, to feel the things I want to feel. I deny myself so many things. I have all of this other discomfort in my life. And frequently, food is the one place that I'm sourcing pleasure. So that's where we get into that stuffed territory, right? I'm fantasizing about some food that I think will be the source of pleasure. Then I'm in a wrestling match with myself if I'm restricting about not having it. And then I finally, quote unquote, give in and I do have it and I overindulge in it. And so a lot of times when I work with people on this and I tell them we're not taking anything away, they're like scared to not take anything. I'm like, yeah, no, we're not taking anything away. But what I do want to focus on is increasing your allotment, your receivership, your comfort around receiving and enjoying in every other area of your life. So that, right, like if the only place you source pleasure is food, I can't take that away from you because you
Right.
need pleasure. If the only place you're sourcing pleasure is your evening glass of wine, I'm not going to tell you to cut it out. That
Mhm.
doesn't make sense. But what we can do is turn up the pleasure in so many other areas and see if your need for that one thing decreases. And it
Mhm.
almost always does.
Yep, yep. And I think that's the other thing, is that recognizing that when your pleasure is also linked with restriction and deprivation, then you start to equate pleasure with pain and shame and guilt. So you just lose the joy that comes with eating. because food is not just fuel, right? Food is like culture and tradition and connection. And, you know, if I smell someone making oatmeal on the stovetop, I can transport to cooking with my mom.
Yeah.
If I smell certain Spanish dishes, I could picture myself in the kitchen with my grandma. So the idea that food is just fuel is such a short-sighted way of seeing things, but then also, couple it with that restriction and deprivation, and suddenly all things that you consume make you feel guilt.
Yeah. And I'm so glad y'all, I don't know if we're going to talk about boundaries. We're going to find out, but there's so many things to talk about. This is all tied together. Have you ever read the book Fearing the Black Body, The Racial Origins of Fat Phobia by Sabrina
Oh,
Strang? Highly recommend it to everyone. It's a fantastic book and it's really helpful. And if you are like me, the kind of person where like understanding how we got to this point and like who is served, that's a question I ask a lot, right? What, like, follow the money and who is served. When we look at diet culture, when we look at like that 90s marketing, right? Who is served by this, right? The corporations at the top, the multi-billion-dollar diet industry, who is being served by these concepts that are pumped through society that they negatively impact. And, I don't want to be insensitive about men's body image issues because they are there and they are prevalent and they are real, but they are different.
yeah.
And your outcomes in society are different in some ways to a certain point because fat phobia is so baked into our culture.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that she really breaks down in this book is the timeline of when and how the ideas about restricting food came into popular culture. And really at the beginning, she talks about the Enlightenment and the idea of like before that, right? You would look at even art and like you would see in European art, everyone was large. Like it was a sign of wealth to be a larger body person. It meant you had food and you weren't doing hard labor all day. And then in the Enlightenment, all of these religious and scholarly men started on this idea that it was not pious, it was not devout to be so ruled by pleasures of the flesh and overindulging in food, in drink, in sex, and that intelligent men were lean. And so first it was like slender women or slender men, and women could still be plump. And then it really becomes racially motivated during the transatlantic slave trade, where white women being slender was a marker of status and class over Black and brown women who were perceived as rounder and larger. And that was used to justify racism.
Mm-hmm.
And it really breaks down these ideas that being able to abstain from food and drink, that's where we see that enter in, that I should feel guilty for eating certain foods or drinking certain things. That idea wasn't part of popular culture before. And so when we look at that guilt feeling, why do I feel guilty for eating chocolate? Why do I feel guilty for like going out to a celebratory dinner with my friends and eating whatever I want and having dessert and having wine? Where did that come from? This idea that there's good food and bad food and that is moralistic. Somebody created that for a reason and entered it into our consciousness. It's not true. It's not real, right? It was used to justify really a religious ideology that we may not even subscribe to. It's just still in the culture. And to me, understanding some of that stuff, that really started to help me break out of it because I was like, wait, I don't even agree with this.
Mm-hmm.
I was taught this when I was a kid, and so I just accepted it. But now that I know where it comes from, I don't feel like this is true. I don't feel like God thinks I'm a bad person if I eat chocolate.
No.
Like, where did this come from? Like, this is so weird.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like, to take it one further, I don't feel like we come to earth to abstain from earthly pleasure. If I'm here to have a body, I'm here to experience having a body and all the great things that come. Like, I want to taste things and touch things and like have sex and sweat and run and swim and like put my toes in sand, like all of these delicious things, like have zits, like all the weird things we come here to experience. We can only experience when we're in a body on earth. Like, if
Yeah.
we weren't supposed to do that, we wouldn't be here.
Right. I love, love, love that. And I also think like there's so much of the idea of focusing on the body, focusing on smallness that I feel like society uses in general as a control mechanism. Because if you are constantly focused on what you're not, there's no way in hell you can grow what you actually are. And what I start to see is that a woman who sees and loves herself deeply is a powerful being. And that really threatens so many, like, just different parts of,
Patriarchal men, we could say
yeah,
it.
yeah. The whole society that keeps us like, if we are focused on, I'm not thin enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy enough, I need to constantly focus on changing me, then everyone else stays in power and we sit there just basically like killing ourselves.
We found the tie into boundaries right there, because the focus on being smaller as being the measure of your worth it can start in the body, but that's not where it ends.
Mhm.
Because then you also need to be, especially if you are socialized as a girl, right? Meek, polite,
Mhm. Nice.
agreeable, nice,
Yep.
not make anyone uncomfortable,
Mhm.
a pleasure to have in class, right? Like, we're not supposed to be too talkative, right? If you have big opinions, then you're too chatty,
Or your bitch.
you're a bitch, right? But even starting little girls, like, oh, she's
Yeah.
bossy.
Yes.
Whereas the little boy, he's like, oh, he's a born leader.
Yes. Yes. Or when they say that when there's little kids and they're like, oh, they're such a good girl. They're so grown up. And it's like they are a shell of who they are because we force them to be.
Right? They're terrified.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or they're compliant. Or like me and a lot of other women I know, they have undiagnosed ADHD. They're disassociated. They are staring out the window, right? Because it doesn't manifest the same in girls as it does. I know so many adult women who are finding out they have ADHD and they're like, oh, this makes so much sense.
Mhm.
Because yeah, we were quiet. The boys who were diagnosed with ADHD were running around, they were kicking, they were playing, right? In girls, it shows up as being spacey. So you seem like you're quiet and well behaved. You're actually just like staring out the window thinking about something else. You get called on and you're like, oh, I have no idea. Or you have all this social anxiety. And so you're way ahead, right? That's how it manifests. It just looks different. And, I think societally, we still don't really pay attention to girls, to what's happening for girls or the reality of girls. And that's a whole separate thing. But essentially, we're talking about being groomed from a very young age to not recognize what our boundaries are, what our genuine needs are,
Mhm.
what our desires are,
Mhm.
and to experience our own needs, desires, and pleasures as something we're doing wrong and something we should feel guilty for, because I'm supposed to want to be nice and
Yes.
agreeable and make everything nice for everybody. And like, even like mom eats last, that kind of stuff of like mom's rushing around making sure everyone else is fed and doesn't sit down at the table. That this is normal and that this is what it means to be a good girl, a good boy, a good woman, a good man, a good person, a good partner. And then we grow up and we don't know how to assert ourselves, say what we really like and don't like, say no when someone asks us for a favor that we don't want to do,
Mhm.
right? We feel that I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. I don't want
Mhm.
to make anybody feel bad. And so I'll just feel bad because I'm used to that. That's okay. I can take it. And then we feel bad, and that perpetuates our low self-worth feelings. Nobody cares about me.
Yeah.
If they cared about me, they would notice that I'm not uncomfortable and they would just not ask me for that, versus like it is on me to tell people no, even if they don't like it, right? All of these things start to come up as adults where it's like this strategy for survival made sense when we were children and we couldn't get away and other people were in charge of us, it doesn't function for making a happy adult. And we don't know what it is or how to get out of it. And then we're self-medicating through food or alcohol or whatever our little vice is. And then we're beating ourselves up for that vice. But that vice is the way that we're trying to manage, like, oh, I'm not really living the life I want to live.
Yeah.
It's a mess.
It is. And I think for so many women, they don't even recognize that there is a different alternative, right? Like, I think for myself, for a long time, I literally saw my role, my entire identity was wrapped up in being wife and mom. So much that this was just 2 years ago that my business coach asked me, like, what do you desire? And I thought I was so like simplistic and which was a nice way of saying like I am feeling the things people want me to feel. But I said to her, my desires are to have a strong relationship rooted in friendship, and that my daughters be happy and self-accepting and self-loving, and that I live comfortably financially. And she's like, Evelyn, those desires have nothing to do with you. You're talking about parenting and partnership and providing. What does that have to do with you? And that was like the biggest wake up call to me that I had never dreamt for myself. I literally had been trained to recognize that my value was entirely wrapped up in who I was to other people. And I really didn't give a shit about who I was to myself, because so long as everybody told me I was great and everybody told me what a wonderful job I was, and I felt the exhaustion that went with it, then I thought I was doing it right. Like, I didn't even recognize, even though there were parts of me that were fighting for mental and emotional freedom and fighting for who I knew I could be, there were still parts of me that were completely controlled by this idea that what I wanted and needed was not important.
Yeah. And going again back to boundaries, right? If boundaries are understanding where we begin and other people end, where we end and other people begin, and more importantly, where our responsibility ends and other people's begin, you can see how all of the things that we've been talking about the way that we're raise us to have no clear concept of that. Because if all of my worth and value is measured in how people are reacting to me and people's approval of me, then I have no idea of where I end and other people begin. And I have no idea of what I'm responsible for and you're responsible for. And that's why we have this feeling that, like, if I say no and someone else is upset, that's almost too much pain and discomfort for me to bear, because I also can't tell the difference between my feelings and your feelings. If you're upset, I must be upset. Or if you're upset, I must be wrong. There's no way for me to conceive of the idea that you can be upset and I can be okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can disapprove of me and I can still be whole.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't really have, like, those literal boundaries. They're all permeable. They're all mush. So we're like, oh, okay, I can't say no because you're going to be upset, which will mean I am bad and wrong. And so I must be doing something wrong if I want to say no to you. And right, like, it's all very confusing. Start to be able to be like, oh, I am a whole sovereign being with my own thoughts and feelings and opinions and experience of reality and feeling, like, an emotional experience of the world. And so are you. And yours is just as real to you as mine is to me. But I'm not in charge of yours and you're not in charge of mine. Can feel really scary at the beginning. And for a lot of us who are chronic overgivers and people pleasers, what I know was a hard pill for me to swallow at the beginning was I thought I was so intimate and other people were avoidant with me, and that I was so giving and that other people were withholding from me. Recognize and understand that I was actually kind of manipulative, that I was avoiding intimacy because our no is a really important part of our personality. I'm not letting you really get to know me if I never tell you what I don't like. If I like, yeah, every time we're around each other, I eat bananas because you brought bananas and I never tell you I hate bananas, That's something you don't know about me. And then I, in our friendship, feel unknown, feel lonely, feel
Mhm.
isolated, right? That's why people are like, oh, they should have known. Why would they know? Nobody's
Right.
a mind reader, right? But like that it's a way that I prevented people from getting to know me because I had such low self-esteem and low self-worth that I thought that if they really knew me, they wouldn't like me because my value is not based in who I am, it's based on what I do for you. So it feels really hard and confusing at the beginning to be like, oh, I'm just as avoidant of real intimacy as other people are. It's just that it looks different for me. It looks like saying yes when I want to say no.
Mhm.
It looks like overgiving. It looks like bending over backwards on me,
Yeah.
but it's still not letting people know the real me because I'm scared.
Yeah. I think too, there's another part of this that where when you are telling people what they want to hear, or you're doing the things that they want to do without telling them what you actually want, like not only does it keep you disconnected from yourself and what you actually want, it really is like this perpetual self betrayal. Like you just continue to like reinforce the idea that you're not worthy of it because you yourself won't be honest with what you need, right?
Yeah.
So it's like this cycle of like you do this thing you don't want to do, you feel ashamed or embarrassed or afraid of the outcome if you speak your truth, which then tells you, look, you're a liar, Evelyn. You don't tell anybody the truth, not them or yourself. So here we are back again. I let me do more so I can prove I'm worthy. And it just continues and continues until one day you say, like, shit, how about I just like, you first have to ask, what do I even like? Right? Like, what do I even like before I can tell anybody else? Can I even tell myself?
Yeah. And it also reinforces the lack of worthiness because we start of telling ourselves the story that like, if I'm always in relationships where I'm the giver and everyone else is the taker, there's a story that I have that I like believe that that's what I'm worthy of, that like, why don't people love me the way I love them?
Mhm.
Why don't people give to me the way that I give to them? Like that makes us feel bad. It makes us feel lonely, it reinforces our lack of deserving stories. And then again, we're trying to perform our way out of it. Someday, the other person is going to look up and be like, oh, you've been so generous to me. Let me start being generous to you, which isn't usually what happens because you've established a relationship in which you give and you always seem happy to give and they take and they're always happy to take. Why would they turn it around? It's working for them.
Exactly, exactly. So like if you're working with somebody and you feel like, boundaries is a big issue, where do you start? Like, is it a boundary with self first? Is it a boundary with other people? Is it simultaneous? Like, how do you even begin to unpack that?
Yeah. So, one, I think is really starting to understand. I think at the simplest level, boundaries keep good things in and bad things out,
Mm.
right? If you have a fence around your garden, it's to keep the plants in and the animals out. A lot of people function with what I call reverse boundary function, which I never hear anybody else say, but reverse boundary is AKA a trap, which is it keeps bad things in and good things out.
Mm.
So if I'm spending all of my time and energy mired in relationships where I'm overgiving and I never feel my needs getting met, and I never feel reciprocal love, affection, attention, and I'm spending all my time trying to fix this relationship and perform in this relationship, I'm preventing myself from going out and finding relationships that might be more reciprocal and more balanced. I'm literally keeping bad things in and good things out. I am not a match for relationships that are more reciprocal. If I'm in a business, like keeping all of these clients who like nickel and dime me and want me to work on weekends and are never satisfied with anything, and I'm spending all of my time trying to get these clients to value my work, I am not taking the time to go out and find clients who are a better match for my services, who value me, right? So first, it's just recognizing, where am I putting a lot of time and energy into keeping things the way they are? And is that preventing me from starting to change things? And like even starting there, just with like doing like an inventory
Mhm.
of our life, our relationships, like go category by category through your friendships, your romantic partnership, your work. Like, where am I working really hard to actually keep bad things in and good things out? Then I think one of my favorite questions, instead of asking, why am I like this or why is it like this, would be to ask, why do I like this? which is a hard question. What am I getting out of this? Right? Because that's where we find the wound. Oh, I get to tell myself the story that I'm the nice one. I get to tell myself the story that I'm the generous one. I even get to tell myself the story that no one loves me as much as I love them, which pokes at a particular wound that I have from my childhood that I've never healed. And I get to keep that wound active and alive. Okay, now that I've recognized that, like that's usually a sobering thing to recognize, like, ooh, there's a payoff from
Yeah.
this behavior. It's not comfortable, but it's familiar.
Mm-hmm.
Can I nerd out about the brain for a second?
Go for it.
Okay. So two things I think are really important. One is to understand that we use the word feelings and emotions interchangeably, but they're actually different. Feelings are the conscious part. We're aware of feelings. It's also a physiological thing. So like hot, sharp, stomach ache, knot in my throat. Like I felt like I was kicked in the gut, right? When people are describing feelings, there's usually it's visceral, it's in the body.
Okay.
Also, we're usually aware, like I feel pissed, I feel angry, I feel sad. Emotions are actually subconscious. We're not always aware that we're having an emotional experience. And everyone's conscious feeling as a result of their subconscious emotion can be different. So, an example I give of this is like the subconscious emotion, right, which is primal, their limbic, might be fear. If you are a person who loves roller coasters, your feeling response to the fear of being on a roller coaster feels like excitement and exhilaration. If you're a person who hates roller coasters, your feeling response to being on a roller coaster is terror. So it's the same emotion underneath, right? We're still having the subconscious experience as fear, but the feeling expression is different.
Hmm.
And this is important because a lot of the time we might be feeling something that kind of doesn't match our emotional experience because we don't really have contact with our emotions anymore after a lifetime of doing what we're told. So it might be my emotional experience is I feel sad. I feel devalued. I feel hurt. But my feeling experience is I'm irritated,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so you're just short tempered. You're like nitpicking at your partner. You're snapping at your kids. You're like walking around huffy. But
Mm-hmm.
what you're not realizing until you get alone and maybe like you go into journaling, you sit with a close friend who asks you that question that hits like, hey, what's really going on? And then you break down in tears because we're not always in touch with our true emotional experience.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we've walled it off, right? Like when you think about, unfortunately, for a lot of people, you know, who are socialized as boys, like our cis straight men out here, they might have a deep emotional experience of pain, abandonment, and they're experiencing it as anger. That's what they're feeling because they're so disconnected from their emotional experience because they were taught if they cried, that was bad. And if they showed, you know, their vulnerability, that was weakness. So after a while, you just get walled off and you don't actually know what your emotional experience is. And sometimes, if you're like me, you don't feel anything. So for me, I would be like, one of the ways I could tell I was headed toward depression was like, oh, I'm sleeping a lot. I don't feel like doing anything. I'm watching way more TV. I'm drinking more. I'm smoking more weed. My behaviors are how I got clued off that I might have something going on, but I didn't feel anything because I was just like, just keep going, just
Yep.
keep working, just keep focusing on what needs to be done today. And so for some of us, if we're really disconnected, we might quote unquote feel fine. How are you doing? Fine.
Yeah.
Your behaviors are telling a different story.
Mm-hmm.
And so starting to slowly rebuild our trust with like our emotional experience. You can't see, but as I'm doing this, I'm like, I have a hand on my tummy and a hand on my heart, like to start to go in and remake it safe, really experience our own emotions, to admit our emotions, not just the acceptable one, like, oh, it
Yeah.
feels more acceptable to be irritable than it does to admit, like, I'm sad. Where's the space for my sad? Where is the safety for my, like, I feel scared. And so starting to go in and build the sensitivity to recognize, just like I had to do with hunger, what
Mm-hmm.
am I really experiencing right now? What are my feelings indicating to me? I really believe our feelings are sacred signals that are designed to guide us toward what we want. if I'm like feeling like every day that I drive to work, I like start getting pissed. My feelings are trying to let me know, like maybe it's time to move on from this job, or
Yeah.
maybe I don't like it here anymore. Maybe this isn't the right place for me. My feelings are always trying to guide me. They're never the problem. We guilt and shame ourselves for our feelings so much. My feelings are never the problem. My feelings are trying to let me know something's off. In the same way, our feelings let us know if our hand gets too close to the stove, that's hot. If we're feeling uncomfortable with a person, that is our wisdom trying to let us know something's going on that needs your attention here. There's a boundary that's not being spoken. You need to tell this person, don't stand so close to me. You need to tell this person, I don't like when you touch me like that. I don't like when you say this thing to me. Our feelings are there to guide us through creating a life that feels safe. And so that I think is like really what we have to start going into after a lifetime of being cut off from our body and from our emotions and from our real wants and needs. It's just starting to build that conversation again.
Oh, that's beautiful. It's beautiful. And it's so, for someone who has been disconnected for so long, to even be able to pause and say, like, what am I feeling? Like a basic question, what am I feeling? For someone who has spent their life shoving that feeling away, making sure that it was like buried under everything else, right? Like being able to uncover that is a big deal.
Yeah. And there's certain tools. One of the ones that I use, like you can just go online and look up the feelings wheel.
Yep.
Right? I'll take out a feelings wheel and just be like, point. Okay, good. Like let's right. Let's get into it. Another one is the chakras, right? So just starting with where do you feel it in your body? And you might be like, oh, I feel like a knot in my throat. And then you can look at a description of imbalanced throat chakra and just read through it. I used to have to do this. I would put my hand on the place where I felt it in my body. Oh, I feel it in my heart. I feel it in my stomach. I would read the description and I would like kind of, you can just like feel a ping when you're like, oh, it's that one. Train myself the same way I had to do with hunger. Like, what is this that I'm experiencing? And then you start to develop intimacy. And what I love to like really think is that like your body with all of its infinite wisdom, right, which is the house of your emotions, your feelings, your intuition, no matter what your relationship has been like with it in the past, it's like a puppy that's like wagging its tail behind the door, just waiting for you to open that door and pay attention to it. It might take a little while. It might be a little hesitant with you, with your brain, because you're like, oh, you've been mean to me in the past, but like it wants that relationship. And so it's not a fast process. And at the beginning, it can feel overwhelming because you're like, whoa, it like kind of got worse before it got better because now I have all these feelings. And you're like, yeah, that's part of it. And that's like, it's gonna even out.
Wow. I love it. I just love the idea that the work that you're doing is, I mean, it's literally like liberating women, like liberating them from shame and guilt and taking on identities that don't even really truly represent who they are in their soul. Like that, just the ability to grow and be allowed to be you is foreign to a lot of people, but it's so freeing.
And it's what we're here for.
Yes.
It's what we're, right? Like almost all of us, right? We want to be known. We want to be witnessed and approved of and
Mm-hmm.
known. That's
Mm-hmm.
all we want. And we learn, unfortunately, a lot of survival strategies in our childhoods that prevent that, which is
Yeah.
why I say it made sense in childhood, but it doesn't work to make a happy adult because
Mm-hmm.
they're preventing us from being known. This is like when people tell me like they feel lonely in their romantic partnership, they feel lonely in their friendships, right? It's like, yeah, you're not letting people know you.
Mm-hmm.
You're physically present with them. You know them. Do they know you?
Mm-hmm.
And if they don't, is it because they're not paying attention or is it because you don't let them in because you're
I can say that for myself, I, for the longest time, felt that in a lot of relationships that I had, friendships, whatever. And it wasn't that I wasn't letting myself be seen, it's that I didn't know me either. I was actually on a podcast one day And the question that the host asked me was like kind of mind blowing. When my own response came out of my mouth, I was completely unaware. But she asked me, have you ever felt like you didn't fit in? And I was like, no, actually, never, because I molded myself to be whoever I needed to be for whatever environment I was in.
Yep.
So I always fit in, but I never belonged. I didn't realize that I spent my life being who I was expected to be in whatever environment I was in. So of course I got along with everyone. Of course everyone thought Evelyn was so fun to be around because Evelyn was whoever the hell you needed her to be in that moment. Always, always living for everyone else's approval and not even knowing if what I was doing was what I wanted to be doing.
Yeah. Fitting in was your superpower.
Yeah. Yeah. I could mold myself into anything.
Yeah. Childhood is hard, man. It's brutal. It's a terrible thing, especially the way we do it. But like, and by the way we do it, I mean in the United States, especially if you go to public school. But like, yeah, these things, when you look at it, you're like, yeah, this makes perfect sense. When you also look at like kids who are getting bullied, and you're like, not gonna be me.
Yeah.
This is a strategy to avoid pain.
Mhm.
I'll just be super friendly. I'll just be super nice. I'll just be super compliant, right? Like all of these things that I can do to make it through this kind of scary situation and avoid pain. That's what I had to do to get through it. And it made perfect sense. And then
Yep.
you get out and you're like, these skills don't work as adults.
Skills make me feel horrible. Everything that I learned makes me feel horrible. Wow. So, I mean, listen, this conversation was so important. We got into boundaries slightly, but
A
I feel
little
like
bit. We
so much
covered a lot of
more.
ground.
Yeah. There's so much more about us as human beings that we're so connected through. Like I say this all the time, our stories are different, but our pain is the same. We all want the same basic things, and we're all fighting for that same basic feeling of being heard and understood and, just being allowed to just be.
Yeah.
Like we want to just be. I now, I won't change who I am for anyone anymore. And I started to recognize that like owning who I was finally and falling in love with my heart, like I can feel how other people change when I'm in the room. I can feel how they relax a little bit more because my energy is allowing them to be, right? Like I recognize that my daughters are light, right? They walk in, they are light, but it's because of the work that I did on myself that they're allowed to be themselves, right? So even though a lot of us are raised to kind of disconnect from ourselves, we also learn to reconnect and then spread that instead, right? So, like, it feels powerful now at this point in my life to know that everything that I've gone through has helped me release other people from going through it maybe sooner, right? Maybe faster, maybe without feeling alone. Like, I get to be the person I needed, and I get to put people out into this world that make it brighter too.
Yeah. And that ripple effect, right, is so important. I want to offer for anyone who can really relate to what Evelyn just shared, which I definitely can. If you are wondering where like a good place is to start with self-worth work, and you feel like you define yourself by your doing, especially if you get perfectionistic, right? Perfectionism is a defensive strategy to get our approval needs met, right? If I can just be perfect, then all people will approve of me, right? Oh, I have to do everything for everyone. A really important question to ask is, do I believe that I am worthy of love, care, dignity, respect, and happiness, even if I don't do anything for anyone? Right? Even if I never did another thing. And especially like look at where you derive your most worth from. Like, even if I never earned another dollar, would I still be worthy? Even if I never lost another pound, would I still be worthy? Even if I never, right? Like, just kind of go through all the things that you look at that you derive your worth from and say, if I took this away, do I still believe that I'm worthy? And if the answer is no, then you found the work that you need to do, right? Do I believe I'm worthy just in my beingness, or do I have to do something to be worthy of love?
Mm-hmm. That's good. Oh, Sarah, this conversation was so good. and has me like in such a thoughtful state, like just such a thoughtful state. So I'm kind of just, this was so needed. So for you, thank you for everything that you brought here today. If people wanted to connect with you or follow you, or I'm not sure if you're accepting new clients, like how do they connect with you?
Yeah, I am. I love working with people on this type of stuff in life coaching. My website is intuitiveedgecoaching.com. You can find me there. I'm not active on Instagram right now. I have an Instagram, but I'm taking the year off of Instagram, which has been really fun. But I have it. It's at Intuitive Edge Coaching. You can also find me on YouTube at Intuitive Edge Coaching. I'm being more active there this year. I'm like, what if she's a YouTube girly? Let's try it out. Less content. Like people are like 3 posts a day on Instagram, 1 post a week on YouTube. I'm like, let's try this. I'm enjoying it. So yeah, I am accepting clients in work specifically related to this, and I would love to work with people. I'm also writing a book. I don't know if I'm supposed to be talking about it yet, but it's supposed to be out next year. It's called The 6 Pillars of Body Love, and it really gets into the stuff that we've been talking about today. So if you go to my website, get on my email list, definitely when the book comes out, you'll be able to find that. And it really walks people through kind of building some of the sensitivities that we were talking about today and getting back in touch with themselves. And it goes step by step through what I believe are like the 6 key areas we need to fortify to start to feel whole.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Cera, your work is so needed, your work is so needed. And literally everything that you went through was to shape you to become the person someone else needs to. Like, I always remind my friends that you're not just gifted, you are a gift, right? Like you are someone's answered prayer. So I love that you're literally walking and embodying that. Beautiful. Before I let you go, I'm going to ask you my difficult question of the hour. And that is, in this community, we're all about being intuitive and instinctual and releasing everyone's expectations but our own. That's called minding mine. When I say mind your business, I'm talking about getting all in your heart, your desires, your needs, what makes you tick. So how do you think learning to mind yours, learning to tune into your body, learning to do what's best for you, how does that change the legacy that you will leave?
One of my deepest beliefs is that if you don't do your dance, it will never be done. If you don't sing your song, it will never be sung. If you don't speak your words, it will never be spoken. There is only, as far as we know, one opportunity for the amazing collection of like unlikely atoms and stardust that came together, that knitted themselves together to be you in your body, in your family, in your lineage, in your community, in your life right now. The likelihood of that is so small. It's so impossibly small that of all of the things that could have happened, you were formed. To really sit down and think about the lineage of humans that had to survive for you to be here.
Mm-hmm.
The crazy mix of circumstances that had to happen for you to exist. That is so unlikely that I believe it can't be an accident. And so if it's not an accident, I think it has to be a miracle. So you're here as you for this tiny, tiny amount of time, and you're the only person who gets to do you in the world. And if you don't find a way to be the youiest you can be, it will never be done. And what a waste of all of the resources that went into bringing you here, of all of the things that you've experienced, of all of, even the sad things, even the hard things, like you said, that they come together to create you. It is the most important work that you can possibly do in your life, to do whatever healing is required for you to be comfortable and confident to be fully expressed. It's just, there's no other, right? The time's going to pass anyway. You're going to spend the money anyway. Whatever it is, it's going to take. If you're like, oh my God, it's going to take years and there's going to be therapy, I'm going to have to get coaching, it's going to be hard. Yeah. But what else are you going to do? Like, what else are you going to do with your human life? Like, whatever it is that it takes for you to do what you need to do to be able to live the life you want to live and share your real gifts, skills, and talents on the planet, because everybody has some. You were brought here for a reason. There's something that's on your heart and your soul to share, and we need it. I especially think right now, I think humanity is in a dire state and it's getting worse. I think like we need it. It's all hands on deck, like the sensitive people, the healers, the helpers, the people who have a heart for service. Like it's our time. We are needed. So whatever it is that you have to do to be able to share your gifts with the collective, please, 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 please do it. And so for me, the work that I'm doing is part of creating that ripple effect. Like I, as one person, can only reach so many people, but everybody I've worked with, like that now they go out and do their work, and I call their clients are my grand clients, right? Like I help find the confidence you needed, and then you went off and started a healing business, and now you're helping other people, right? Like we have this ability to really create a profound ripple effect of change on the planet by our willingness to say, hey, what I was taught isn't the way I'm going to end up. The way I was raised isn't how I'm going to move forward, right? I'm going to be that change in my lineage, in my family, in my community. It's going to start with me. And I'm willing to ripple that outward, even if it's hard and expensive and slow and uncomfortable, and I have to cry a lot.
Beautiful. That is such an amazing way to just look at you, right? Like to look at you, like you are a walking, breathing miracle.
We
And you
all
need to go out and share that too.
Yeah, we all are. I really believe that. And we're all so needed.
Yeah. Amazing. Cera, thank you so much for being here today. And I want to thank everyone else for joining us for what I believe was a pretty damn amazing conversation. Thank you for tuning in for another episode. And if this one resonated with you, make sure to comment, rate, and review this podcast. You know that your feedback helps me grow. And until next time, go live your life on your terms and please mind your business. We'll catch you in the next episode.